The daughter, glimpsing the scene from the window, felt an icy panic pierce her soul. The image of the wild beast, guarding her mother like a treasure, was a mirror of her own inhumanity. Fear, a feeling she rarely experienced, made her run. In an uncontrolled frenzy, she bolted into the street, away from the mansion, away from the Jaguar, away from the truth. But fate, which she had so often invoked for her mother, had other plans for her. At that exact moment, a police car was patrolling the area, and the daughter, in her desperation and flight, was spotted, her panicked run sealing her own judgment. Nature had indeed taken care of everything. The soft rumble of the police car's engine sounded like thunder in the daughter's ears, freezing her in the middle of the hot asphalt. The panic that had propelled her moments before transformed into paralyzing terror. She, who had always dictated the rules, who controlled every aspect of her own life and the lives of others, was now prey, exposed and vulnerable under the merciless sun. The sirens, distant moments ago, now pulsed in her head, not as a warning, but as a sentence. Two officers, with seriousness etched on their faces, emerged from the car, their silhouettes imposing against the dazzling morning light. "Ma'am, is everything all right? Why are you running like this?" The taller officer's grave voice pierced the tense silence, laden with an authority she was accustomed to wielding, not receiving. The daughter tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Her voice caught in a knot of fear and shame. Words refused to come out, replaced by gasping breaths. Her hair was disheveled, her silk dress, once impeccable, now wrinkled and soiled from the desperate run. She looked like a madwoman, and the irony of it did not escape her even in her state of shock. The image of the Jaguar, majestic and protective, still burned in her retina, a vivid reminder of the abyss she had dug for herself. Meanwhile, within the mansion walls, an almost sacred silence had settled. The mother, still sitting on the soft grass, watched the Jaguar. The feline, with its amber eyes fixed on her, seemed not only to guard, but also to soothe. Each breath of the Jaguar was a slow, steady rhythm, a perfect counterpoint to the agitation the daughter felt outside. The elderly woman, for the first time in a long time, felt safe, protected by a force that transcended any human logic. The morning sun, once a reminder of incessant labor, now warmed her tired skin with unexpected tenderness. She didn't know what was happening in the street, but a deep peace enveloped her, like an invisible cloak. Back on the asphalt, the daughter finally managed to stammer something. An animal in my house, a jaguar." The words tumbled out, almost incomprehensible. She pointed frantically at the mansion, hoping the urgency in her voice would convey the gravity of the threat. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. "A jaguar, ma'am? Here, in a luxury condominium?" The second officer questioned, his voice tinged with incredulity. They were accustomed to false alarms, to people in panic attacks over trivial matters. But the intensity of that woman's desperation was palpable. The daughter, sensing their disbelief, tried to compose herself. "Yes, big, yellow with spots. It's in there, in the garden. My mother is in there." Her mother's name escaped her lips like a confession, a stain on her facade of indifference. Fear for her own life, and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of guilt for her mother, propelled her to be more convincing. The officers, though still skeptical, noticed the mansion gate ajar, an anomaly in such an opulent property. The woman, visibly shaken and disoriented, didn't seem to be entirely fabricating a story. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down. What's your name? And the address?" the taller officer asked, maintaining a cautious distance but with a firmer tone. She provided the details, her voice still trembling. The daughter's mind spun in a spiral of chaotic thoughts. The Jaguar, her mother, the police, her reputation, everything was collapsing. She, the architect of her own fortune and her own cruelty, watched her empire of control crumble before a wild force and an unexpected intervention of the law. What would her neighbors say? Her friends? What would the society she so strived to impress say? The officers, after a brief radio consultation, decided the situation warranted a check. The Jaguar story was bizarre, but the woman's panic was real. "Stay here, ma'am. We'll take a look," the younger officer instructed, while the older one approached the gate, hand on his weapon's holster, a mix of caution and curiosity in his eyes. For the daughter, each step the officers took toward her mansion was a blow to her chest. They would see the Jaguar, they would see her mother. They would see the truth about her negligence, about her cruelty, about the miserable life she imposed on the elderly woman. The garden, which she considered her private sanctuary, was about to become the stage for her public humiliation. Fate, with its relentless irony, was finally collecting its price. And the Jaguar was the messenger. The air felt denser, each beat of her heart a drum announcing the inevitable. The dense, heavy air, laden with the smell of hot asphalt and the faint perfume of garden flowers, seemed to suffocate the daughter. Each step the officers took toward the mansion's ajar gate was a dull thud in her chest, a hammer striking the wall of her self-confidence. She watched, paralyzed, as the older officer, hand instinctively on his holster, peered through the gate's crack. Skepticism still lingered on his shoulders, but professional caution propelled him. It was a luxury condominium, yes, but the woman's story, however implausible, carried a tone of desperation that could not be ignored. For the daughter, time stretched and twisted, each second an eternity of agony. Her mind, once a labyrinth of strategies and manipulations, was now a chaotic battlefield. The Jaguar, her mother, the police, the scandal. Her reputation, built with years of effort and an impeccable facade, was about to crumble under the weight of a brutal truth. She imagined the whispers, the disapproving glances of neighbors, the sensational headlines. The image of a disheveled woman screaming about a Jaguar would be her ruin. The older officer, after a brief peek, signaled to the younger one, who approached with a tactical flashlight, even under the strong morning sun. There was something strange about the quietness of the garden, the absence of any sound other than the distant chirping of a bird. Mansions like that usually buzzed with the activity of gardeners, maids, or the simple hum of an affluent life, but here only silence, a silence that, for the daughter, was deafening, foreshadowing catastrophe. With calculated caution, the older officer pushed the gate open a little more, revealing a larger portion of the lush garden. The scent of freshly cut grass and jasmine now mingled with a wilder, earthier aroma that the city-accustomed officers couldn't immediately identify. Their eyes swept the landscape, searching for any sign of anomaly. And then they saw her. In the center of the lawn, under the generous shade of an ancient mango tree, sat the mother, and beside her, majestic and serene, was the Jaguar. The feline, with its golden fur flecked with dark rosettes, looked like a living sculpture, a creature from another world transplanted into that luxurious setting. Its amber eyes, previously fixed on the elderly woman, now slowly turned to the intruders at the gate without hostility, just a calm curiosity and an undeniable power. The officers froze, skepticism dissolved in an instant, replaced by visceral shock. A Jaguar. For real. In a condominium garden. The scene was so surreal it defied logic, yet there it was, undeniable, pulsating. The elderly woman, with her eyes closed, seemed to be sleeping, or perhaps just resting, with an expression of peace that violently contrasted with the tension emanating from the officers. The Jaguar, in turn, seemed a silent guardian, its presence imposing but not threatening. In the street, the daughter let out a muffled groan. Her knees buckled, and she had to lean against a neighbor's wall to keep from falling. The sight of the paralyzed officers confirmed her worst nightmare. They saw the Jaguar. They saw her mother. And soon they would see the truth behind that perfect facade. The fear of the Jaguar, which had propelled her out of the house, was now eclipsed by the terror of exposure. Her life, meticulously built on lies and appearances, was disintegrating before her eyes. The older officer, regaining his composure, raised the radio to his mouth. "Central, we have a situation here. Confirmation of a wild animal, a jaguar, on private property. Emerald Garden Condominium, Orchid Street, number 123. An elderly woman is on site, apparently unharmed, requesting immediate patrol support and contact with animal control." His voice was professional, but there was an almost imperceptible tremor, a note of disbelief that even training couldn't suppress. The second officer, still holding his tactical flashlight, observed the scene with a mix of fascination and apprehension. The Jaguar, instead of reacting aggressively to the radio's voice, merely tilted its head, as if listening. The elderly woman, in turn, slowly opened her eyes, blinking under the sunlight. She looked at the Jaguar, then at the officers at the gate, and a small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her tired lips. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep calm, a serene acceptance. This calm of the elderly woman, the absence of panic, was a detail that did not escape the trained eyes of the officers. The woman in the street was in shock, hysterical, claiming imminent danger for her mother, but the mother, inside, seemed to be at peace, protected by the beast the daughter so feared. The daughter's narrative began to crack, revealing the fissures of a more complex and darker story. For the daughter, the image of her mother's smile was a blow more painful than any slap. It was silent proof of her cruelty, evidence that her mother found more comfort and safety beside a wild beast than under her own roof. Shame flooded her, a scorching heat rising from her stomach to her face. What would the officers say when they realized the truth? What would they do? The sirens, distant moments ago, began to approach, echoing through the condominium, breaking the morning's quiet. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of her perfect life. She, who had always controlled everything, was now at the mercy of a Jaguar, her mother, and the law. Fate, with its relentless irony, was finally collecting its price, and the Jaguar, was the messenger of her downfall. The story she had so carefully woven was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, under the watchful eyes of justice and nature. The sound of sirens, once a distant lament, transformed into a strident chorus that tore through the condominium's morning quiet. Blue and red lights flashed frantically, painting the asphalt and the mansion's facades with an unsettling glow. For the daughter, each approaching siren was a herald of her disgrace, each flashing light and relentless spotlight on her life of appearances. She cowered against the wall, feeling the rough cement scratch her skin, but the physical pain was minuscule compared to the agony tearing at her soul. Additional military police vehicles and, to her horror, a vehicle with the animal control emblem lined up on the street. Uniformed men and women, some with containment equipment, exited the cars, their professional gazes sweeping the scene. The daughter felt like an insect under a magnifying glass, exposed, vulnerable. Her initial panic about the Jaguar now mingled with an even greater terror, the terror of public humiliation, of the deconstruction of her perfect image. The officer who had made the first contact with Central now approached the newcomers, gesturing toward the ajar gate. Voices mingled in a murmur of orders and questions, but the daughter didn't need to listen to understand. Everyone was there because of her house, because of her mother, because of her Jaguar. Her meticulously controlled life was in tatters, and she was the architect of her own ruin. One of the animal control agents, a robust man in a protective vest, approached the gate with a long-range scope. He peered through the crack, and the daughter watched his face harden into an expression of contained surprise. He signaled to his colleagues, who prepared tranquilizer darts and nets. The tension in the air was palpable, but inside the garden, the scene remained strangely serene. The jaguar, oblivious to the external commotion, was still lying beside the elderly woman. Its amber eyes, now more attentive, observed the movements at the gate with an almost defiant calm. There was no aggression, just a silent vigilance, as if protecting its refuge and its companion. The mother, in turn, had closed her eyes again, a faint smile still playing on her lips. She seemed to have found an improbable sanctuary, a haven of peace amidst the unfolding chaos. The officers, now in greater numbers, began to cordon off the area, moving away the few curious neighbors who were starting to peek from behind their curtains. One of them, a sergeant with years of experience, approached the daughter, who was still leaning against the wall, pale and trembling. "Ma'am, we need more information. What's your relationship with the elderly woman inside? Is she your mother?" The sergeant's voice was firm but not aggressive. He observed the woman with a keen gaze, noting the disarray in her expensive clothes, her disheveled hair, the panic in her eyes. The daughter tried to answer, but the words tangled in her throat. "Yes, my mother." She managed to stammer, her voice a mere thread of sound. "And why is she in there with a wild animal? Did you know about the jaguar's presence?" The sergeant continued, his expression unshakable. The daughter felt a chill. Lying now would be useless, but the truth was even more terrifying. "No, I didn't know. It just appeared. I was inside the house and it was there." She pointed frantically at the mansion, trying to divert attention from herself. The sergeant exchanged a look with the first officer, who had reported the elderly woman's calm. There was a glaring dissonance between the daughter's hysteria and the mother's serenity. "Ma'am, your mother seems to be quite at ease with the animal. She doesn't seem scared. Can you explain that?" The question hung in the air, laden with insinuation. The daughter felt cold sweat trickle down her back. Her mind raced for a plausible excuse, but there was none. The image of her mother smiling beside the jaguar was a silent testimony against her. I don't know. Maybe she's in shock. She's elderly, sick." She tried to argue, but her own words sounded hollow, desperate. The animal control agents, after a more detailed assessment, began to position themselves strategically. The idea was to try and tranquilize the feline without causing panic, but the elderly woman's presence complicated everything. They needed to ensure her safety before any intervention. "We need someone to call the elderly woman. She might help us safely move the animal away," one of the agents suggested. The sergeant looked at the daughter. "Ma'am, can your mother hear? Can you call her?" The daughter swallowed hard. Call her mother? What if the jaguar reacted? What if her mother told them something? Fear mingled with shame. She knew that her mother, in her fragile state, would not hesitate to reveal the truth of her miserable existence. I don't know if she'll hear. She's a bit deaf." The lie slipped out, weak and transparent. The sergeant raised an eyebrow, his patience beginning to wear thin. "Ma'am, your mother seemed quite alert when we saw her. And frankly, the story isn't adding up. Why would a sick elderly woman be cleaning such a large garden by herself? And why was the gate open?" The sergeant's questions were like knives, each one piercing the armor of falsehood the daughter had built. She felt her face burn, not just with shame, but with rage. Rage at the jaguar, rage at her mother, rage at that relentless fate that was unmasking her. Inside the garden, the jaguar, as if sensing the change in atmosphere, raised its head, its eyes fixed on the officers at the gate, and a low, almost inaudible growl escaped its throat. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of warning, a reminder of its powerful presence. The mother, hearing the sound, opened her eyes again. and her wrinkled hand instinctively reached out to touch the feline's soft fur, as if to soothe it. This interaction, seen through the eyes of the officers and agents, cemented the strange truth of the situation. The jaguar was not a threat to the elderly woman. It was, in some way, her protector, and the daughter outside, in her calculated hysteria, seemed to be the true source of danger, not to the jaguar, but to her own mother. The tables had turned, and the hunter now found herself the prey, cornered by the truth she had tried so hard to hide. The jaguar's low growl, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air, was the catalyst. It wasn't an attacking roar, but an ancestral warning, a line drawn in the sand. The elderly woman's wrinkled hand, reaching out to touch the feline's soft fur, sealed their understanding. That gesture, so intimate and devoid of fear, was the final piece of the puzzle for the trained eyes of the officers and agents. The jaguar was not a threat to the elderly woman. It was, in some way, her protector, and the daughter outside in her calculated hysteria seemed to be the true source of danger. Not to the jaguar, but to her own mother. The sergeant, with a soul-cutting gaze, fixed on the daughter. The armor of falsehood she had built was in ruins, and the truth, naked and brutal, began to emerge. "Ma'am," the sergeant's voice was now colder, more incisive. "Your mother doesn't seem deaf at all, and frankly, the story of a sick elderly woman cleaning a garden this size alone doesn't hold up. What exactly is going on here?" The daughter felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead, mixing with tears of panic and rage. Her eyes, once filled with manufactured terror, now gleamed with impotent fury. Rage at the jaguar which had invaded her sanctuary of lies, rage at her mother who, in her fragility, had become a silent and devastating witness, and rage at herself for having underestimated fate's ability to collect its price. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat, a tight knot of despair. The animal control agents, previously focused on containing the feline, now observed the interaction between the elderly woman and the jaguar with professional fascination. One of them, the most experienced, raised a radio. "Central, cancel the immediate tranquilization order. The situation is more complex. The animal appears to have protective behavior towards the elderly woman. We need a more in-depth assessment before any intervention." The voice was calm, but the surprise was evident. The sergeant didn't wait for a response from the daughter. He turned to one of his officers. "Officer Silva, please escort the lady to the patrol car. She needs to calm down and give a statement. And please check for any previous incidents involving the elderly woman or this residence." The order was clear, and the daughter felt a chill run down her spine. The patrol car, the statement, previous incidents. Her perfect life was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, under the relentless light of the law. "No, I'm not going anywhere!" she shrieked, a hysterical note in her voice. She tried to pull away from the approaching officer, but her movements were clumsy, desperate. "I own this house! My mother is in danger in there! You can't arrest me!" The sergeant sighed, his patience exhausted. "No one is talking about arresting you, ma'am. We're talking about clarifying the facts. And at the moment, the facts indicate your mother is safer beside a wild animal than under your supposed protection." The irony in his words was a direct hit, more painful than any physical assault. As Officer Silva, with gentle firmness, led the daughter toward the patrol car, she cast a last look at the garden. The scene was surreal. The mother, serene, with her eyes closed, and the jaguar, a silent guardian, its amber eyes fixed on the intruders. It was the image of her defeat, irrefutable proof of her cruelty. Shame flooded her, a scorching heat rising from her stomach to her face. What would the neighbors say? What would her friends, her society say? Her reputation, her life, everything was in tatters. Inside the garden, the jaguar, as if sensing the daughter's departure, relaxed slightly. Its growl ceased and it lowered its head, but its eyes remained vigilant. The mother, in turn, opened her eyes again, and a smile, more pronounced this time, appeared on her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of relief. A deep relief, as if a millennial weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. She looked at the jaguar, and a glow of undisguised gratitude filled her tired eyes. The sergeant, observing the scene, felt a knot in his throat. He had seen many things in his career, but the image of that elderly woman, finding peace and protection in a wild beast, was something he would never forget. He approached the gate, speaking in a low voice to the animal control agents. "We need to enter cautiously. The priority is the elderly woman's safety, and please try to communicate with her. She might help us understand what happened." The agents nodded, preparing to enter. The tension in the air was palpable, but now it was a different kind of tension. It wasn't fear of the beast, but apprehension before the truth that was about to be revealed. The daughter, already seated in the patrol car, watched the movement of the officers and agents with wide eyes. She knew it was the end of her charade, the end of her life of luxury and control. The jaguar was the messenger of her downfall, the herald of justice she had so long avoided. Fate, with its relentless irony, had finally collected its price, and the story she had so carefully woven was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, under the watchful eyes of justice and nature. The morning air, previously laden with panic and lies, now vibrated with a different tension, a somber expectation. In the patrol car, the daughter watched, helpless, as the sergeant and animal control agents approached the gate, their silhouettes outlined against the rising sun. Each step they took was a hammer striking the foundations of her carefully constructed life. She felt her stomach churn, a mix of nausea and an icy fear that had nothing to do with the jaguar, but with the truth that was about to explode. Inside the garden, the mother opened her eyes, the smile of relief still on her lips. The jaguar, sensing the stranger's approach, raised its head again, its amber eyes fixed on the gate. A low, continuous growl, like the murmur of distant thunder, began to vibrate in its chest. It wasn't an aggressive sound, but a warning, a reminder that this was territory under its guard. The mother, with the calm of one who had faced far worse storms, reached out and gently touched the jaguar's fur. The growl subsided, but the vigilance remained. The sergeant, with the experience of one who deals with the unpredictable, signaled to the agents. Slowly, no sudden movements. The priority is the lady. One of the agents, a middle-aged man with experienced eyes, nodded. He carried a tranquilizer dart, but the intention was not to use it unless absolutely necessary. The scene of the elderly woman and the jaguar, so peaceful and surreal, had completely changed the protocol. Cautiously, the sergeant opened the gate a little wider, the metal creaking loudly in the morning silence. The jaguar let out a more audible growl, a sound that made the hairs on the back of the daughter's neck in the patrol car stand on end. But the mother, instead of being startled, merely squeezed the jaguar's hand, a gesture of mutual comfort. "Don't worry, my child," the elderly woman's voice, weak but firm, echoed through the garden. "They won't harm you." The sergeant stopped a few feet from the unusual pair. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice soft and respectful. "I'm Sergeant Almeida. We're here to help. Are you all right?" The mother looked at him, her eyes tired, but now with a gleam of dignity. "I'm well, Sergeant. Better than I've been in a long time." She looked at the jaguar, a genuine smile lighting up her wrinkled face. "She kept me company." The animal control agents exchanged glances. The situation was unprecedented, a large wild animal acting as a guard dog for an elderly woman. The most experienced agent, the same one who had cancelled the tranquilization order, approached slowly. "Ma'am, we need to ensure your safety, And the animals? Can we approach a little closer?" The jaguar, as if understanding the words, raised its head and sniffed the air, its eyes fixed on the agent. The mother, noticing the feline's hesitation, spoke again. "She's a good animal, just protective." She gestured with her hand, inviting them to approach. "Come, there's no danger." The sergeant and the agents advanced with caution, maintaining a respectful distance from the jaguar. The feline observed every movement, but showed no aggression, only attentive vigilance. The daughter, from the patrol car, watched the scene unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. Her mother, whom she had reduced to a shadow, was now the center of attention, protected by a beast, and speaking with the police. The humiliation was unbearable. "Ma'am, your daughter told us you were in danger," the sergeant began, testing the waters. The mother let out a weak, humorless laugh. "In danger? Yes, I was, but not from her." She pointed her head toward the jaguar. The danger was elsewhere. Her eyes shifted to the patrol car, where the daughter sat, trembling. The message was clear, even without explicit words. The mother sighed, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of suffering. "Yes, Sergeant, we can talk. But first, please, get her out of here." She indicated the patrol car with a subtle nod of her head. "Her presence, it makes me ill." The daughter, even from a distance, felt the blow. Her mother's words, spoken with devastating calm, were a verdict. She was no longer the lady of the mansion, the controller of her mother's life. She was the accused, the villain of the story, unmasked by a jaguar and the newfound courage of an exhausted elderly woman. Officer Silver, who was beside her, looked at her with an expression that mixed pity and disapproval. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the station," the sergeant said, his voice now firmer but still respectful of the elderly woman. "We need to record your statement and also ensure your safety." The mother nodded, but didn't move. "I'll go, but what about her?" She pointed to the jaguar. "She needs a safe place too. She protected me." The animal control agents exchanged glances. "Ma'am, we'll do our best to ensure she's taken to a sanctuary or a suitable place where she can live in peace," the most experienced agent promised. "She's a magnificent animal." The mother finally stood up with the sergeant's help. The jaguar, like a loyal dog, rose with her, walking beside her to the edge of the flower bed. The elderly woman turned to the jaguar, and their eyes met. There was a silent farewell, a deep thank you. "Thank you, my friend," the mother whispered, and the jaguar in response nudged its head into her hand, an unexpected gesture of affection. As the mother was carefully led out of the garden, passing through the gate, the daughter in the patrol car felt a knot in her throat. Her mother, previously stooped and silent, now walked with a dignity she had never seen. And the jaguar, the herald of her disgrace, watched the scene, a silent guardian of justice finally arriving. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the mansion, which now seemed a stage, no longer a refuge. The spectacle of truth had only just begun. The mother was settled in the back seat of a different patrol car, one without bars, a sign that she was a witness, not a prisoner. Sergeant Almeida sat beside her, offering a bottle of water. "Would you like to go to a hospital for a checkup? We can arrange it." The mother shook her head, a faint smile. "No, Sergeant, I'm fine. Just tired and hungry." The simplicity of her request touched the sergeant. Years of neglect and mistreatment were revealed in those few words. Meanwhile, the animal control agents approached the jaguar. The feline, after the elderly woman's departure, had moved under a leafy tree, its eyes still fixed on the gate. There was no aggression, only profound caution. The most experienced agent, with slow and calculated movements, began to speak in a low voice, trying to calm the animal. "We'll help you, girl. You're safe now." The jaguar turned its head, observing the men with an almost human intelligence. It didn't flee, but it also didn't allow itself to be easily approached. Safety was the priority, and the jaguar seemed to understand that. In the other patrol car, the daughter was in shock. Officer Silver, who accompanied her, began filling out some paperwork. "Ma'am, we need your full details. And please, do not resist. The situation is serious." The daughter, her voice choked, tried to stammer. "This is a mistake. My mother. She's senile. She made all this up, and that jaguar. It's dangerous." Officer Silver merely looked at her with disdain. "The jaguar protected your mother, and you, it seems, put her in danger. The evidence is clear." The mansion, once a symbol of her power and status, now seemed a monument to her downfall. The neighbors, who were beginning to peek from behind their curtains, would be the first to spread the news. Her life of appearances, built on her mother's pain, was crumbling. The jaguar, the animal she so feared, had been the catalyst for her mother's liberation and her own disgrace. Fate, with its relentless irony, had finally collected its price, and the story she had so carefully woven was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, under the watchful eyes of justice and nature. The mother, in the patrol car, felt the car move. She looked back at the mansion that had been her prison for so long. A deep sigh of relief escaped her lips. The jaguar, still under the tree, looked like a bronze statue, a silent guardian of a secret that was now public. The old woman, for the first time in years, felt the wind of freedom on her face and the promise of a new beginning. The tension in the air hadn't disappeared, but for her, it was a tension of expectation, not of fear. The truth finally was free. In the patrol car, the daughter's world crumbled in slow motion, each piece of her meticulously constructed facade shattering into 1,000 fragments. Officer Silver, oblivious to the turmoil in her mind, continued to fill out the forms, his pen scratching paper like an executioner sharpening his blade. Her mother's words, her presence, "It makes me ill," echoed in her ears, a verdict more cruel than any prison sentence. It was the final rejection, irrefutable proof that she had lost everything, including the last spark of affection from the one who had given her life. "This is a mistake," she stammered again, her voice choked, more to convince herself than the officer. "My mother is senile. She made all this up, and that jaguar. It's dangerous. It attacked me." Officer Silver raised his eyes, a look that mixed weariness and thinly veiled disdain. "Ma'am, the jaguar didn't attack you. It startled you, and your panic led you into the street where you were caught. As for your mother, she seems perfectly lucid, and the evidence in the garden, you cleaning her exhaustion. It doesn't corroborate your version." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "You are being detained on suspicion of elder abuse and neglect, and depending on your mother's testimony, the charges could be far more serious." Those words, elder abuse, struck her like lightning. It wasn't just the public humiliation, the loss of her mansion, but the indelible stain on her name, the ruin of her reputation. She, the exemplary daughter, the successful woman, would now be labeled a criminal. Panic transformed into icy terror. She looked at the mansion, which now seemed like a golden cage from which her mother had escaped, and she, the jailer, had been imprisoned. Meanwhile, in the garden, the dance between wild nature and civilization continued. The jaguar, under the leafy tree, observed the animal control agents with an almost supernatural intelligence. Its amber eyes followed every movement, every cautious gesture. The most experienced agent, a man with years of working with large felines, knew that any mistake could be fatal. He spoke in a low, constant murmur while his colleagues set up an improvised containment barrier and prepared the tranquilizer dart, still as a last resort. "We'll help you, girl," he repeated, his voice calm and firm. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you." The jaguar didn't flee. It didn't growl aggressively, but the tension in its body was palpable. It was a creature of instinct, and its instinct told it to be cautious. It had fulfilled its purpose, protecting the elderly woman, and now seemed to wait with wild dignity for the next chapter of its own story. The agent noted the absence of injuries, the shiny coat, a sign that despite being wild, it was healthy. It was a magnificent animal, and the idea of harming it was repugnant. In the other patrol car, the mother felt the car pull away from the mansion, taking her away from years of captivity and pain. Sergeant Almeida, beside her, offered her a sandwich and juice. "You need to eat. Afterwards, we can go to the police station or a more comfortable place for your statement." The mother accepted the food with gratitude, her eyes moist. "I just want a quiet place, Sergeant, where I can tell the truth without fear." Her voice, previously weak, gained strength with each word, each bite of the sandwich. Freedom had a sweet and unexpected taste. Back at the mansion, the street began to fill with curious neighbors. Whispers spread like wildfire. Curtains opened. Shocked and gossiping faces observed the scene. The police, animal control, the patrol car with the detained daughter, and for a brief moment, the sight of the jaguar in the garden. The image of the daughter, once so haughty, now cowering in the backseat of a police car, was the final proof that the mask had fallen. The daughter felt the stares. The cell phone cameras pointed at her. Shame was a poison spreading through her veins. Her perfect life, her impeccable image, everything was being dismantled before everyone's eyes. She tried to look away, but there was nowhere to hide. The jaguar, the animal she so feared, had been the herald of her disgrace. But the truth about her cruelty, was the real monster she had created. Officer Silva, noticing her state but without any compassion, said, "Ma'am, it's best you start thinking about cooperating. Your mother has a strong testimony, and the evidence is irrefutable. You have the right to an attorney. But I advise you to think carefully before trying to deny the undeniable." The daughter closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. The distant sound of animal control agents, still trying to contain the jaguar, seemed like the death knell of her own life. The mansion, once a symbol of her power and status, was now a stage for her downfall, a monument to her own cruelty. The jaguar, a creature of the wild, had brought justice in a way no one could have predicted, unraveling a story of pain and oppression that finally saw the light of day. The sun, now high in the sky, illuminated not only the mansion, but the truth that for so long had been kept in the shadows. In the patrol car, the daughter's world didn't just crumble, it pulverized into a sandstorm. Every grain of her perfect existence swept away by the relentless wind of truth. Tears streamed, but they weren't of remorse, rather of impotent rage, a fury against fate, against the jaguar, against her mother, against all who dared witness her downfall. Officer Silva, a man of few words and piercing gaze, observed her with a patience bordering on boredom. He had seen 1,000 faces of despair and knew that denial was only the first stage. "Ma'am," he began, his voice monotonous but laden with authority, "your mother is not senile. She is exhausted, yes, but lucid. And what she has to say, combined with the evidence we've already collected, paints a very different picture from what you're trying to sell us." He paused, his eyes fixed on her. "You have the right to an attorney. I suggest you contact one immediately, because what's at stake here isn't just a fine for disturbing the peace. It's your freedom." The word freedom echoed in the daughter's mind, a hollow and terrifying sound. She, who had always considered herself free to do as she pleased, to shape her reality and her mother's, now found herself cornered, trapped in a cage of steel and glass. The mansion, Once the stage of her opulence now seemed a mausoleum for her reputation. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, words caught in a knot of panic and shame. The image of the neighbors, cell phones in hand, recording every second of her humiliation, was an even greater torment than the prospect of prison. Her life of appearances, built on her mother's pain and silence, was being broadcast live to the world. Meanwhile, in the other patrol car, the mother felt the warmth of the sun on her face, a warmth that had long not been accompanied by pain or exhaustion. The sandwich in her hands was the most delicious food she had tasted in years, not for the delicacy itself, but for the context. It was an offering of care, not a crumb of contempt. Sergeant Almeida beside her maintained a light conversation, allowing her to compose herself. "We don't need to go straight to the police station, ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice gentle. "We have an elder support center nearby with trained professionals to listen and offer all necessary support. There, you can give your statement calmly, in a safe and welcoming environment." The mother nodded, visible relief on her marked face. "Yes, Sergeant, a quiet place where I can tell everything without fear." Her voice, once a fragile whisper, now carried a new firmness, a resilience that had been suffocated for years. She looked back at the mansion fading on the horizon, and a deep sigh of liberation escaped her lips. The Jaguar, though invisible now, remained in her mind as a guardian angel, the catalyst for her new life. They arrived at a discreet building, surrounded by a small, well-kept garden. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just left. A kind-faced woman, a social worker, greeted them with a welcoming smile. "Welcome, ma'am. My name is Anna. Please, make yourself at home. You are safe here." The mother felt a knot in her chest begin to unravel. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, she was truly safe, truly seen. She took a deep breath, ready to finally speak her truth. Meanwhile, in the garden, the jaguar maintained its dignified posture, a living statue under the leafy tree. The animal control agents, led by the experienced Marcos, moved with an almost ritualistic slowness. They knew patience was key. Marcos, with his constant soothing murmur, tried to establish a connection, a bridge between the wild and human worlds. "It's all right, girl. No one will hurt you. You're safe." The jaguar turned its head, its amber eyes following every movement, every shadow. It showed no fear, but an innate caution, the wisdom of a predator that understands danger. The tranquilizer dart was ready, but Marcos was reluctant to use it. He saw the jaguar not as a threat, but as a creature that had acted out of a primitive instinct for protection, a herald of wild justice. The improvised containment barrier was almost complete, a careful encirclement to ensure the animal didn't escape into residential areas. The priority was everyone's safety, including the jaguar's own. Finally, with a coordinated movement, the agents closed the last gap. The jaguar, sensing the finality of the encirclement, let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of ancestral power, but made no aggressive moves. It simply watched, its gaze penetrating as if understanding its role in the unfolding drama. Marcos, with a sigh of relief, lowered the tranquilizer gun. "It won't be necessary," he told his men. "She's contained. We'll prepare her for transport with the least possible stress." A large, robust transport cage was carefully positioned. The jaguar, with surprising dignity, entered the cage after a few minutes of attentive observation, as if accepting its temporary fate. Officer Silva, noticing the daughter's imminent collapse, but without any hint of compassion, reiterated, "Ma'am, you will be taken to the police station to give a formal statement. The charges of elder abuse are serious, and the penalty can be severe. I advise you once again to cooperate. Trying to deny the undeniable will only worsen your situation." The daughter closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. The distant sound of animal control agents, who now seemed to have successfully cornered the Jaguar, sounded like the death knell of her own life. The mansion, once a symbol of her power and status, was now a stage for her downfall, a monument to her own cruelty. The Jaguar, a creature of the wild, had brought justice in a way no one could have predicted, unraveling a story of pain and oppression that finally saw the light of day. The sun, now high in the sky, illuminated not only the mansion, but the truth that for so long had been kept in the shadows, and which now, in its full glory, demanded its price. As the police car finally drove away, the daughter caught a last glimpse of the large transport cage being loaded onto a truck. Inside, the silhouette of the Jaguar, majestic even in captivity, seemed to stare back at her. It was the last image of her perfect life, shattered by the very wildness she had despised. The murmurs of the crowd, the camera flashes, the receding sirens, everything became a chaotic symphony of her complete ruin. The patrol car glided through the streets, carrying not only the daughter, but the wreckage of a life built on cruelty and illusion. Every meter traveled was a nail in the coffin of her reputation, every turn a sharp twist in her destiny. She refused to open her eyes, as if the darkness beneath her eyelids could erase the image of the Jaguar, the crowd, her mother, everything that had unmasked her. But her mind, treacherous, replayed the camera flashes, the murmurs of condemnation, Officer Silver's cold gaze. Rage bubbled, a poison more potent than shame, directed at everyone but herself. "You have the right to an attorney," Officer Silver's voice echoed, merciless. "I suggest you contact one immediately." The word attorney sounded like an alarm, an acknowledgement that the situation was real, legal, irreversible. She, who had always resolved everything with money and influence, now found herself reduced to a mere accused, stripped of her shield of power. Panic, once a distant wave, was now a tsunami engulfing her. Freedom, which she so cherished and so brazenly denied her mother, was at stake. Meanwhile, in a peaceful refuge a few miles away, the mother was greeted by Anna, the social worker. The environment was soft. The pastel tones of the walls and the natural light streaming through the windows created an atmosphere of welcome. The smell of fresh coffee and the absence of any sound of scrubbing or buckets were a balm to her exhausted soul. She sat in a soft armchair, her body relaxing in a way she hadn't felt in years. The sandwich, now finished, had left a taste of dignity in her mouth. "There's no rush, Ma'am," Anna said, her voice calm and empathetic. "When you feel ready, you can tell us what happened. We're here to listen and help." The mother looked at her aged hands, the marks of years of forced labor still visible, but now somehow different. They were no longer symbols of her enslavement, but of her resilience. She took a deep breath, the clean air filling her lungs with a sense of renewal. "I'm ready," she said, her voice still a little shaky, but with new strength. "I want to tell everything." And so the words began to flow, hesitant at first, then with a torrent of emotions. She spoke of the mansion, once a home, then a prison. She spoke of her daughter's cruel demands, of the physical and emotional pain, of the daily humiliation. Each sentence was a brick removed from a wall of silence, revealing the naked and raw truth. Anna listened attentively, taking notes, but most importantly offering a look of understanding the mother hadn't seen in decades. Back in the patrol car, the daughter was taken to the police station. The building, grey and imposing, seemed to suck all color from the world. The street's buzz had been replaced by the oppressive silence of the police environment. As she descended, the curious eyes of the few passing employees pierced her. The facade of superiority she had so cultivated was in tatters, and she felt exposed, vulnerable. Inside, the interrogation room was cold and impersonal. A metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. Officer Silver sat opposite her, his expression unshakable. "Ma'am, you will be formally accused of elder abuse, deprivation of liberty, and possibly domestic slavery. The evidence is robust, including your mother's testimony and images captured by neighbors." With each word, the ground beneath the daughter's feet seemed to give way. Domestic slavery. The phrase struck her like lightning, terrifying in its precision. She tried to argue, her voice choked by shock and rage. "This is absurd. My mother is senile. She made it all up. I was just helping her stay active." Officer Silver merely watched her, emotionless. "Your mother is being evaluated by professionals, and what she describes, ma'am, is not help. It's abuse." He handed her a phone. "Last chance. Call your attorney, because what comes next won't be a simple statement." The daughter took the phone, her hands trembling. Reality, once so distant, now suffocated her. The image of the Jaguar, majestic and wild, returned to her mind, no longer as a threat, but as the personification of relentless justice. It had been the catalyst, the turning point that unveiled years of darkness. The daughter's world didn't just crumble, it pulverized into a sandstorm. Every grain of her perfect existence swept away by the relentless wind of truth. Tears streamed, but they weren't of remorse, rather of impotent rage, a fury against fate, against the Jaguar, against her mother, against all who dared witness her downfall. The death knell of her perfect life had begun, and she was the sole spectator, trapped in her own cell of lies. Meanwhile, the Jaguar, now tranquilized and secure in its transport cage, was carefully taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center. Its amber eyes, once full of caution and instinct, now reflected the calm of an animal that, for a brief moment, had been the instrument of a greater justice. It had fulfilled its role, an unexpected link between wild nature and human morality, a reminder that truth, like nature, always finds a way to manifest itself. The sun, which had previously illuminated the mansion and the hidden truth, now set, painting the sky orange and purple like a veil over the end of one era and the beginning of another. The daughter held the phone, the device cold and heavy in her trembling hands. Officer Silver's voice, distant and impassive, still echoed in her ears. "Last chance. Call your attorney, because what comes next won't be a simple statement." The dialed number seemed a portal to a different hell, one where the rules were written by others, not by her. On the other end of the line, her lawyer's voice, a man she paid dearly to keep her problems out of the public eye, initially sounded sleepy, but soon grew grave, almost reproachful, upon hearing the barrage of accusations. He didn't console her. He confronted her with the harsh reality. "Do you realize the gravity of this?" The lawyer's voice cut through the air, sharper than any blade. "Domestic slavery isn't a charge you resolve with a check. This is a social and legal condemnation that can ruin your life forever. And the media, they're in a frenzy. Your image is being pulverized in real time." The word pulverized echoed in the cold room, a final blow. Her image, carefully constructed over years, was now fodder for vultures. She tried to argue, her voice choked, but the lawyer interrupted her with no patience for her lies. "Don't lie to me. There's no time for that. We need a damage mitigation strategy, and fast. Your mother's testimony is devastating, and the neighbors' images are irrefutable. There's no denying the undeniable." Panic, once a distant wave, was now a tsunami engulfing her completely. The cell door closed. Not just the one at the police station, but the one to her own life. Freedom, which she so cherished and so brazenly denied her mother, was at stake. Rage bubbled, a poison more potent than shame, directed at everyone but herself. Against the lawyer for no longer being complacent, against the police for not being bribable, against her mother for daring to speak, and against the Jaguar, The wild creature that had dared to invade her perfect world and expose its rot. The daughter's world didn't just crumble, it pulverized into a sandstorm, every grain of her perfect existence swept away by the relentless wind of truth. While the daughter faced her private hell, the mother, in her refuge, found a strange and long-forgotten peace. Words flowed, unhindered, like a river finally breaking a dam. She described the cold mornings, the back pain, the swollen hands, the humiliation of being treated as an object, not a mother. She made me clean the entire house, every day, on my knees, she whispered, her voice choked by the memory. If I stopped to rest, she would scream, call me lazy, useless, and the food. Oh, the food. Her dinner leftovers, or stale bread. I couldn't even drink water without asking permission. The mother's voice, once a fragile whisper, now gained strength, laden with an ancient pain that finally found its voice. Anna, the social worker, listened with silent gravity, her eyes full of a compassion the mother hadn't seen in decades. She took notes, but more importantly, she validated. No one deserves to go through that, ma'am, no one. The mother, feeling the weight of the truth being shared, felt a deep relief. It was as if each word spoken removed a layer of pain from her soul. She spoke of loneliness, fear, hopelessness. But she also spoke of the jaguar, of that moment of unexpected connection, of how the wild animal became her silent protector. It was as if God had sent an angel, she said, a faint smile appearing on her wrinkled lips, a spark of hope amidst the scars of a life of suffering. Far away, in the rehabilitation center, the jaguar slowly awoke. Its amber eyes opened, assessing the new environment with the same dignified caution. It was in a spacious enclosure, with vegetation and an artificial stream, a simulacrum of the freedom it had temporarily lost. Veterinarians and handlers observed it from a distance, marveling at the animal's majesty and calm. It had become a legend in a few hours, the jaguar of justice, an unexpected symbol of a scandal that shocked the city. News spread like wildfire, images of the daughter being led away, of the opulent mansion, of the fragile mother, and, of course, of the majestic jaguar dominated the headlines. Public opinion was unanimous in its condemnation, a thunderous chorus that echoed through the police station corridors, reaching the daughter in her cell, where darkness and silence were merely a prelude to the approaching storm. The lawyer's voice, now a distant thunder, echoed on the phone, each word a hammer striking the fortress of her denial. There's no denying the undeniable, ma'am. The images, the testimony, the jaguar. It's a media circus, and you're the main attraction. The prosecution is thirsty for a high-profile case like this. They won't back down. And your mother, she's being presented as a saintly martyr. Public opinion has already condemned you. The daughter gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Sweat trickled down her forehead, mixing with tears of rage and humiliation. But I have money. I have influence. They can't do this to me. The lawyer's dry laugh from the other end of the line was sharper than any insult. Your money can buy lawyers, but it can't erase the truth when it's broadcast nationwide. And your influence? It crumbled like a sandcastle. Right now you are a symbol, the symbol of the cruel elite that exploits the most vulnerable. The only chance, and I'm being optimistic, is to negotiate. A confession, a reduced sentence. Maybe. But prepare yourself. The fall will be long and painful. The word fall hung in the air, a somber premonition. She hung up the phone, the device heavy in her hands like a brick. The interrogation room door opened, and Officer Silva entered, accompanied by a female officer. His expression was the same, unshakable, but now there was a cold formality in his eyes. Ma'am, your charges have been formalized. You will be transferred to a temporary holding cell while awaiting your custody hearing. Your belongings will be listed and secured. Please stand up. The daughter felt the floor spin. A cell. Her inner cell. The idea was so absurd, so grotesque, that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. But the cold touch of handcuffs on her wrists brought her back to brutal reality. The cold metal, the dry click were the sounds of her world's end. As she was led through the corridors, the murmurs of the police and staff felt like knives. The stares, once curious, were now of contempt, of condemnation. Her facade of superiority had been completely stripped away. She, who had always seen herself above everyone, was now the lowest, the vilest. The cell was small, cold, with a smell of disinfectant and despair. The grey walls seemed to close in on her, and the small, barred window offered only a glimpse of a grey sky, as lifeless as her future. She threw herself onto the concrete bed, rage boiling, but now, for the first time, mixed with a paralyzing fear. The jaguar, the damned jaguar, the wild creature that had been the catalyst of her ruin. She hated it with a burning intensity, but deep down, a voice whispered that the jaguar had only revealed what was already there, far away, in an environment of warmth and compassion. The mother finished her account. The last words came out as a sigh, the end of a heavy burden. "I just wanted a little peace," she said, her voice choked with emotion, but with a new lightness. "A little dignity. I never thought I'd see the sun again without feeling fear." Anna, the social worker, sat beside her, holding her wrinkled hand. "You will have more than peace, Mom. You will have a new life. We will ensure you receive all necessary medical and psychological support, and a safe place to live where you can rest and recover. There are many people who care and want to help." The mother looked at Anna, her eyes moist, but with a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in decades. The image of the jaguar lying beside her in the garden returned to her mind, not as a danger, but as a guardian. "The jaguar, it saved me," she whispered, deep gratitude in her voice. "It was as if God himself had sent a sign." Anna smiled gently. "Sometimes justice comes from where we least expect it. You are an incredibly strong woman. Your courage in speaking out will help ensure that others don't go through what you went through." The mother felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of purpose. She had survived. And now she would speak, not just for herself, but for all the silenced voices. She thought of her daughter, of the rage and bitterness that consumed her. There was no joy in her downfall, only a deep sadness for all that had been lost, for all that would never be. But there was, indeed, a quiet satisfaction in the idea that truth had prevailed. In the rehabilitation center, the jaguar stretched under the artificial sun, its powerful muscles relaxing. It observed the environment with its amber eyes, a predator at rest. Handlers monitored it, marveling at its adaptability. It was more than a wild animal. It was a symbol, a living legend. The Jaguar of Justice was becoming a global icon, its story being told and retold, a reminder that nature, in its wild wisdom, often finds ways to correct humanity's deepest imbalances. News continued to explode. The story of the rich daughter and her elderly mother, the drama of the jaguar, everything mingled in a cauldron of indignation and fascination. The entire city was in suspense, awaiting the next chapters of this twisted fairy tale that had turned into a legal nightmare. The daughter, in her cold cell, heard the distant echoes of sirens and the incessant hum of the outside world, a world she had dominated and that now devoured her. The storm had arrived, and she was in the eye of the hurricane, alone, without her money, without her influence, only with the naked and raw truth of her actions. The public trial had already begun, and the verdict seemed sealed. The night in the cell was a cold, claustrophobic purgatory. Each minute was an eternity. punctuated by the distant drip of a faucet and the muffled moans of other lost souls. The daughter, accustomed to the opulent silence of her mansion, now found herself swallowed by a cacophony of despair. The smell of cheap disinfectant and old sweat clung to her nostrils, a constant reminder of her new and repugnant reality. She cowered on the concrete bed, the rough, thin blanket offering little protection against the cold that seemed to come from within her bones. Rage still boiled, a toxic fuel that prevented her from succumbing to total fear. She hated the police, the lawyer, her mother, and above all, the Jaguar. The damned Jaguar, with its amber eyes and silent presence, had been the herald of her ruin. Her mind, once a labyrinth of strategies and manipulations, now was a battlefield of regrets and denials. How could this have happened? She, the untouchable, the powerful, reduced to this. The lawyer's words echoed in her head. The fall will be long and painful. And he was right. Every contemptuous glance from the officers, every murmur in the corridors, every square inch of that foul cell was a nail in the coffin of her old life. Money, which had always been her shield and her sword, had become useless. Her influence, a mirage that dissolved under the relentless sun of truth. She, who had always controlled everything and everyone, now controlled not even her own destiny. Panic began to seep in, an icy current rising up her spine, suffocating her breath. Meanwhile, in a world of light and compassion, the mother was enveloped by a long-forgotten warmth. After the exhaustive account, Anna, the social worker, provided a warm bath, a nutritious meal, and clean, soft clothes. The mother felt the warm water wash away, not just the grime of days, but also years of humiliation and pain. Every fiber of her being relaxed, as if an invisible weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer alone. Solitude, her constant companion, had been replaced by a gentle and attentive presence. Initial medical exams revealed severe malnutrition, dehydration, and abrasions, but also surprising resilience. Her body was fragile, but her spirit, now free, began to blossom. She slept a deep, restorative sleep, the first in decades, without the constant fear of being woken by shouts or orders. Upon waking, the morning sun filtered through the curtains, a soft glow that brought not the threat of a new day of forced labor, but the promise of a fresh start. She had breakfast at a table, not on the floor, and each sip of warm coffee was a small miracle. The mother's story, told in painful detail, had touched the hearts of millions. Her testimony, released in carefully edited excerpts to protect her privacy, but without losing the force of its truth, generated a wave of indignation and solidarity. Donations began to pour in from all over the country. Funds for her recovery, offers of safe housing, messages of support and affection. She became a symbol of strength and overcoming, a voice for the invisible, the exploited. The Jaguar of justice, was the wild heroine who had paved the way for this redemption. In the rehabilitation center, the Jaguar continued to be the center of attention. Its adaptation to the new environment was remarkable. It observed the handlers with dignified curiosity, its amber eyes reflecting an ancestral intelligence. Veterinarians confirmed its excellent health and planned its eventual reintroduction into a natural reserve, a sanctuary where it could live free, away from the dangers and cruelties of the human world. It had fulfilled its purpose, an unexpected agent of natural order that had restored balance where humanity failed. The media offered no respite. Every new piece of information about the case was devoured by the public. The daughter's mansion, once a symbol of status, was now a monument to cruelty, with curious onlookers and journalists surrounding its gates. The image of the daughter, handcuffed, was repeated ad nauseam, a visual reminder of a tyrant's fall. Public judgment was relentless. and the pressure on the prosecution to seek the maximum penalty was immense. In the cell, the daughter felt the overwhelming weight of it all. The lawyer had returned, his voice graver, his eyes darker. "They are seeking the maximum penalty, ma'am. Elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, mistreatment. The prosecution has a solid case. The evidence is irrefutable. And your mother. She is a powerful witness. The only way out is to cooperate. A full confession, perhaps a plea bargain. It's your only hope of not spending the rest of your life here." The word "here" resonated in the cell, a somber echo of her future. The daughter looked at the grey walls, at the small barred window. Her rage, once so potent, began to drain away, replaced by a cold, paralyzing despair. She had nowhere left to run, no one to scream to. The world she had built on the pain of others had completely collapsed, and she was trapped beneath its rubble, alone, with only silence and truth as companions. The Jaguar, in its wild wisdom, had merely revealed what had always been there, hidden beneath the facade of luxury and power. And now, the bill had come due. The word "here" resonated in the cell, a somber echo clinging to the damp, cold walls, penetrating the daughter's bones. She looked at the bars, at the small grey square of sky that was her only window to a world that had rejected her. Despair, once an icy current, was now an ocean engulfing her completely. Rage, her last refuge, finally crumbled to dust, revealing the fragility of her soul. The image of the Jaguar returned, not as a threat but as a mirror. Those amber eyes, once so terrifying, now seemed to reflect the naked and raw truth of her own existence. She had been the predator, the relentless hunter, and now she was the prey, cornered, with no escape. Money, power, influence, everything had evaporated, leaving her with nothing but her actions and the unavoidable consequences. The silence of the cell, once a torment, now seemed to amplify the lawyer's voice in her mind. "It's your only hope of not spending the rest of your life here." The rest of her life. The phrase hung like a death sentence. Her mind, accustomed to calculating risks and manipulating outcomes, now struggled to find any loophole, any way out. But there was none. The web she herself had woven with lies and cruelty had closed in on her. A dry sob escaped her lips, the first sign of an emotion other than rage or contempt in years. It wasn't remorse, not yet. It was grief for her own life, for all she had lost and for all that would never be. She cowered even further on the concrete bed, the rough blanket now feeling like a shroud. The decision was clear, though unbearable. She could no longer fight. She had no way left to fight. With a monumental effort, she stood up, swaying, and knocked on the metal door. The hollow sound reverberated. "God!" Her voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. I want to speak with my lawyer. I want to cooperate." The words were bitter, but the truth they carried was heavier than anything she had ever felt. The fall had reached its lowest point, and the only possible direction was up, through confession and penitence. Far away, in a room bathed in the soft morning light, the mother awoke with a sense of peace she hadn't known in decades. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread floated in the air, not as a reminder of a day of hard labor, but as an invitation to life. She sat on the edge of the soft bed, feeling the texture of the clean sheet beneath her fingers. Her body, though still fragile, responded with new energy. Anna, the social worker, entered with a gentle smile carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, ma'am. Did you sleep well?" "Like an angel," the mother replied, her voice stronger, a sparkle in her eyes. "I never thought I'd feel this again." As she drank her coffee, Anna turned on the television to a low volume. The news spoke of the case, its global repercussions, the wave of solidarity. The image of the mansion, now surrounded by police tape and curious onlookers, was a stark contrast to the tranquility of the room. The mother heard the words confession and cooperation being uttered in relation to her daughter. A sigh escaped her lips. There was no triumph in her heart, only a deep sadness for the daughter she had long lost to greed and cruelty. But there was indeed a sense of justice fulfilled. Her story had become a catalyst. Millions of people, inspired by her courage, began to report abuse, seek help, and reach out to the invisible. The mother, once a shadow, was now a voice, a hope. She accepted an invitation to speak at a forum on elder rights, not to seek revenge, but to share her experience and ensure that others would not suffer in silence. "I want my story to be a beacon," she told Anna with newfound determination. A beacon for those lost in darkness. In the rehabilitation center, the Jaguar was ready for its freedom. Handlers watched it with admiration and a touch of reverence. It had fully recovered, its powerful muscles ready for the challenge of wildlife. The team led it to a large enclosure, and when the door opened, it hesitated for a moment, its amber eyes assessing the green vastness before it. Then, with a graceful leap, it disappeared into the dense forest of a protected nature reserve. The Jaguar of Justice had returned to its kingdom, an eternal symbol that nature, in its untamed wisdom, has its own ways of restoring balance. Its story would continue to be told, a reminder that compassion and truth can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that justice, at times, has claws and eyes that gleam in the dark. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The daughter faced trial, her confession detailed and cold, yet undeniable. She was sentenced to a long prison term, her assets confiscated to compensate victims and support charities. The mansion, once a monument to her opulence, was sold and the money used to build a shelter for the elderly. The mother, in turn, flourished. She found a new home in an elderly community, surrounded by care and respect. Her days were filled with activities, new friendships, and the simple joy of living without fear. She spoke, she wrote, she inspired. Her voice, once silenced, now resonated with the strength of a woman who had survived and chosen to live fully. The Jaguar, free, hunted under the moon, its movements silent and powerful. It was part of the forest again, a living legend, a wild spirit that had fulfilled a purpose greater than anyone could have imagined. And so, the story ended. A tale of cruelty and redemption, of despair and hope, of a jaguar that by seeking shade in a garden had unleashed a storm of justice that swept away the darkness and brought light to those who needed it most. The world had changed, if only a little, because of a mother, a daughter, and a jaguar. Truth, like wild nature, always finds its way.